Fundamentally, I think everyone, in the industry does not need awareness. Like every person in IT who's explored Copilot knows the first thing they need to do is get their data secure. They need to, have compliance. They need to have some basic things, that technical debt that they've had or legacy debt. They need to solve that. And I honestly don't think that's that hard. I'm not saying it's not investment. It's, obviously when you're in the moment, it's hard, but it's time sensitive. You do it. And then most of that, once you've established that, I really don't think there's a lot of like maintenance work on that. I really think if you establish it the right way, use different programmatic models and things like that, especially the way security for Copilot and other stuff is going, I think there's a lot of things that kind of get easier. What happens is we get so focused on that piece that we forget that that is just to turn it on in a responsible way and roll it out. That is not actually driving the ROI. And the ROI, the first starting point is comms. Everyone uses AI to improve communications. Those are easy. Then you get into collab, then management. And those 3 layers you need to achieve pretty quick. Like in 6 months, you want to get, as an organization, be focusing on management scenarios with AI. And it takes time to get there, right? You crawl, walk, run. Similarly, I see a lot of organizations who want to jump straight to what I was alluding to earlier called functional agents. Now, a functional agent is like, I have a customer service system, I have a sales system, and I'm using AI to not just like help me with like, I'm in the loop and controlling it, but doing some things on my behalf. So in the normal, digital assistant, it might be helping me gather my notes from a meeting, right? Making sense of them. The second scenario, a lot of prompting, a lot of delegation. The second scenario is it might actually say, here's what I think should be updated in CRM for you. And in that case, I'm just clicking check, check, check. Like I'm verifying, I'm still in the loop, but it's doing almost all that work for me, right? This is what I think you should upsell. That scenario is what we call functional agents. They do more. And a lot of organizations, like especially in the executive team, want that. Because that, like the quality bar is much more aligned with process and revenue and things like that. It's like much easier to measure. It's more valuable to the company. But you can't jump here. You cannot, if you jump here and you haven't done the work to help people along that journey of understanding how to use it as a digital agent, trust me, you're going to run into a bunch of challenges and you're not going to get good ROI and stuff. So you have to kind of do the first stage of a digital assistance and Copilot, foundational stuff, and then you get into this other one. And so going back to migrations and things like that, what we're finding is everyone gets like, I gotta consolidate security and those things, and that's good. Like, please do it. I'm not just saying it's not a priority, but like IT has to be leading with the business this AI transformation. And when you do that together, then you're going to be able to get to these other scenarios quicker. And just, I'm not saying don't say no, but you do a yes and. So when that executive, because whoever's listening to this happens, when that executive says, I want these, specific workloads, you can say, okay, we're going to roll out those capital P processes. We're going to get, dynamic sales and this new module, and it has AI. Because of course that's happening, right? Across all of our technology projects, they're all getting AI infused. But we need to make sure this other thing happens in parallel, or optimally even a little bit before, because that's going to make these other tools more highly used, highly valuable, and enrich our own data, which is our competitive advantage over time.
I'm curious, how many people do you think that are attending today's session, a webinar, that are actually using AI to summarize it so that they...
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that I think you should. Now, this is a fun digression just for a second, because, hey, look, chat histories, I'm going to connect it to Exchange in some like light way, but like what happens is there's a difference between a transcript and a summary. And I think this is really important. So I see a lot of people thinking, oh, if I just summarize, and then they get disappointed because it missed something, right? The point of the summarization is, again, you got to get more specific. Use it to augment what you're doing. Use it in that way, and it'll get smarter and better over time. But the transcript still has value, right? Just like that message history in chat, or just like, which of course is a migration nightmare for Exchange. But when you also look at things like your email, email history, those things have value even when you do summaries. Because sometimes you do want to dig into like what was said and how was it said, et cetera, right? Not just audit reasons and things like that, but there's legitimate reasons you want to get what was the right statement, what was actually said. And these tools are really good, and they're getting better at long context windows, getting better at long document processing. But there's there's, unless you're really good at prompting, or unless, those tools get better, there's this, I love this thing, just again, another digression. Microsoft's doing this thing called Mad-libbing almost. And I think it's just one of the cleverest UX patterns for Copilot and AI. What you do is, we know when people do a prompt, they don't know what to, prompt engineering is a skill that most people don't have. So what they do is they give you kind of like some gaps, like this are like 3 things you could fill in. You fill in those options, and then it gives you, that prompt output that you want. And you only need to do this like 2 or 3 times before you get like, oh, I could just write that prompt myself that way, right? But this sort of Mad-libbing is also a big change. And if I bring it back to like that, transcription and like the accuracy and verification model, the Mad-libbing, I think, really helps people get better results from those prompts. So I think, we're seeing, the first parties like Microsoft move up the value chain and provide better experiences. That's going to rapidly change over the course of this year. You haven't seen anything, trust me. And then you're also going to see organizations getting clever at not even at a user level, at an organizational level, of how to teach and educate and support people through that transition. And I think, exchange, like communications, is the number 1 workload for AI to start with. It's the easiest one. And all of us, as much as we like to talk about SharePoint and Teams or whatever, vast majority of people still use Outlook for everything, right? It's their number 1 tool. Teams is their second. It's their digital hub, right? Because Outlook's me and my stuff, my calendar, and Teams is us and we. But like, that is fundamental. And so most people the first experiences they're going to get is either meetings or email experiences with AI. So it's such a good opportunity to focus on it when you're doing anything touching Exchange, right? Or Outlook, you should be focusing on that.
We just launched Mailbox migration, but for a while we were in public preview, and we were still cooking the feature, and there were a few things that were going to come out with general availability, and one of those was Mailbox rules. And you would think, how important really are Mailbox rules? And they're very important. And we're hearing a lot of our clients say, look, we're very happy that ShareGate now, at least partially supports Mailbox migration, but we still can't consider ShareGate as a tool, because unless you bring my users Mailbox rules, they're going to be very unhappy. So I think that speaks a lot to the challenge that comes from, change management, where it's difficult to get users to work in a different way. And we're talking about Mailbox rules, but we're seeing a lot of organizations that are moving from one tenant to another, and they have all their content in a single library, in a single site, and it's folders. And while we can help them migrate that and preserve it, there's always this question of like, is this what's best? And oftentimes what we hear from IT is, well, it's what my users do, so I have to give them what they're used to. Otherwise, when they adopt this new tenant, I'm going to get all these tickets. Where are my files? Where are my folders? There's always some restructuring that can be done at that level, but we're just speaking about content and folders. You can look at the site templates and teams and so on. So how do you usually advise your partners and your clients when it comes to driving adoption for newer ways of working as part of an M&A?
First, let me say, I think it's kind of like tilting at windmills when you fight against folders, and whether those are folders in Exchange, like when you're in your mailbox and you've organized with like little rules that route things, or whether we're talking about like SharePoint and file shares and all that. Like, just give up, right? Like, it's okay. It really is. And I think there's a few reasons why, right? So, if we think of like information architecture and knowledge management, it's going through a big change. And that's individually, of course, going through it, but even as like literally as an industry, science, and practice, it's going through some big changes. Because, I think here's a fun example. So most people don't know this. OneDrive had this virtual folders concept they came out with, which is super cool. So you have a project and you have a project site and it has all these folders, right, in SharePoint or Teams, and that's kind of like how we run projects, right? So someone else could come in, maybe they're cross-functional, they're not in that project all the time, and they say, I want to organize my stuff around that project in my own way. Well, OneDrive Virtual Folders gives you that ability, right? You can create like your own version of that. The data is still in the right spots. It's still, security and all that stuff is done, but now I can have my own virtual representation of it. And I think a lot of Outlook is the same way, right? What we've done is we have patterns of communication and things like that, and we figured out our own way to triage that. And some people have learned Clutter, and some people have learned, different tools, because AI has been around for a while in email. But now what we have is we have not just a new set of tools, but a stark difference in productivity. So I think it's fine if people didn't like clutter, turned it off. I think a lot of those things, like, just, it's fine. It's okay. As long as people are getting their jobs done and, you know, your company's growing and everything's successful, there's no need to rock that boat. But I think it's different today, because when we look at like the email scenarios, and we've done like random control trials, we've done our own studies, Microsoft's done them, like the difference in productivity when you use some of these newer practices is, I think on average, I would say that, I know Microsoft has, I think 30% was like their stat that they share, 29% it was in recent studies. But generally speaking, I think it's closer to 60% from our own research and from like Harvard and MIT with ChatGPT and other things on business document writing and things like that, which it has direct correlations to email writing. What we're finding is you're seeing like a 60% baseline productivity gain. And you're seeing obviously a gain. I think the average, again, MIT, Harvard, other, you know, let's get out of Microsoft, other studies, we're seeing around 20% gain. So these new AI digital assistant patterns, 60% productivity gain and 20%, that's without like amplifying it with better data, without plugins, without, you know, custom copilots, without, you know, which are all things you should be doing, without, you know, really great digital excellence, right? Those, and that's, you know, that was data arguably from almost like 6 months ago, which is like 10 years ago in AI terms, right? So that's what we saw, you know, as a baseline for productivity. You can't, it's not like before, you can't ignore this. And look, you know, there are employees that are going to feel threatened by this, and I think it's terrifying and exhilarating, I agree. And so the key is, if you don't want to lose your job, AI is not going to take your job, at least not right now. What's going to happen is someone who uses AI will. And it could be a competitor who steals that work because of that, or it could be someone in your own organization, or it could be, you know, other things that happen. It's really important individually for us to embrace this, to help people understand this is an exponential change. And you know, my favorite analogy for this, you know, is we had the internet era, right? The internet was a major transformative event for business. It changed how we communicated. Imagine like all the different layers. But that happened over 2 decades, right? Arguably, or at least decades. This change with AI, which is exponential and maybe even more significant, it's happening over years if we're lucky. And that compression, right, is why it's so hard right now. And you should feel it's hard. And empathize with people, right? Like in IT, we're used to technology change, and I'm not saying we're all crying, but it is hard to deal with this exponential curve. Imagine how much harder it is when you don't have that digital excellence, when you feel like threatened by it, et cetera. So we need to help people understand, and it's unfortunate, it's not the folders, it's not that stuff. This is a real thing, you know, for their health and longevity, and for our business and for everything else, we have to change. And this is one of those ones we can't opt out of, and we can't defer, because if you defer it, as I mentioned, it's harder for that employee later, and it's much harder for the organization, right? And so, yeah, it's you know, it's like the pandemic. In some ways, it's like it. You have to change, but unlike that, where we can kind of be angry and upset at something else, and maybe you are upset at AI, and that's fine, actually, to be honest. It's just more, just like the pandemic, it's unstoppable. It's happening. Our control and influence over it is very limited, individually and then as things. But, you know, I'm not saying be disheartened by it. Like, you know, I think everyone should lean in and be a part of the conversation, because we can steward the best outcomes for AI. It can bring people closer together, you know, it can, instead of pulling them apart, you know, on like social media and stuff. So I think there's a lot of things we can do politically and policy and other things. But yeah, it's a big change. And I'll say the best examples I have of that is I talked to some union leaders, you know, public sector leaders and stuff, and it's a very different dynamic. I mean, some of the people probably listening to this, you know, are in those spaces where, you know, are you going to be protected? Are you going to be insulated from it? And you're not, because it's so, you know, if I'm paying taxpayer dollars, as an example, I want more output. If I'm in a union, this is something you need to understand, because it's going to have a direct implication on, you know, so these are hard conversations, but that's why it's so important to get the third-party vendors, get the support you need to get the migration stuff out of the way, because this is where you should be spending your time as IT, right? Figuring out that pathway versus, you know, getting from this tenant to this tenant with, you know, the migration. Like, let's do that well, get it out of the way so we can focus on what matters.